Hello, welcome to Talk Julia. My name is David Amos.
And my name is Randy Davila.
And my name is Miguel Raz.
Yes, Miguel, thank you so much for joining us.
Gracias.
This week we have Miguel on the show, joining us from Mexico City, right?
Yes, sir.
Well, Miguel, first of all, thank you so much for joining us. This is absolutely fantastic.
Thank you for inviting me.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're doing, and how you got into Julia.
Well, I started with Julia because there's this professor called David Sanders, and he gives a computational physics course in my university, UNAM, National Autonomous University of Mexico. And, all of my friends said like, hey, you have to take David Sanders' class, and Julia's the next big thing, man. You're missing out if you don't. And I'm like, what? So there's this other like really big professor in computational physics, actually numerical relativity stuff. So simulating black holes on a computer. I'd gone to his conferences before, and he said like, if you're not using Fortran, you're just wasting your time with physics and coding. And I was like, I better take some Fortran courses then. And then I went to David Sanders' course, and he said, no, there's no point to learning Fortran today. Just use Julia. It's 50 times better. And I was like, who should I listen to? And eventually I figured out, I was just like Googling random silly stuff. I mean, the stuff you turn in for class, it's like, I don't know that Julia's like the really big difference. I mean, it's neat, but it's like it's a fancy calculator with extra steps and you plot things. Alan Nadelman says that for his course too. It's like, for this course, like, we're using a glorified calculator. It just doesn't get in the way as much as it could. And at some point I figured out that there was like a link on the Julia Lang site that led to a Slack or a Gitter. And so I started hanging out on Gitter. And that's where I met Scott Jones and Chris Rackauckus and Seth Bromberger. And eventually I think I landed on Discourse. And then I just saw that there was like a post by like this really weird Viking dude, and he was answering questions, like deep lore Julia questions about the compiler or something. I'm like, wow, this guy knows a lot. And like I just asked like, hey, how do I install Julia or something? It was like something really trivial, or like, what is a parser? And he's like, and I don't know, Stefan wrote like 3 or 4 paragraphs and very kind. It was Stefan or Jeff or something. And I was like, who's this person? And then I was like, oh, Stefan Karpinski is like co-creator of the Julia language. And I'm like, what? These people are online? And it's weird because like, coming from physics, all the last names of the people that you read about in the textbooks and the stuff you're learning, like, someone sat with Einstein, they get like a conference hall in their name in the university, right? Like, it's like these big, old, like, untouchable white dudes that you can't really like have access to. It's a very different feeling of like to contribute to that.
Yeah.
You have to like toil for 15 years to like maybe make a dent into humanity's knowledge of like what it means to be part of the universe or whatever. When it comes to coding, it's like, yeah, just send a pull request. Like, you've helped. And so there's such a lower gap to like feeling useful in programming languages. Like, there's way more work to do than there are people. At any rate, I realized that Stefan had answered, and I was like, oh, this is cool. I don't really know why, but this feels really cool. And so I just started like poking around. And this is my actual Julia origin story, which I just contributed to the Julia 10 years blog post, which people haven't read. It's just a collection of like really cool Julia people saying how they got started. And so I just added the 101st entry.
Nice.
And so my decision to learn Julia was to, hang around on the Gitter and the Slack and try and like code up examples. And I couldn't even use an IDE. I didn't know Vim. I didn't know like a lot of stuff that like I didn't know what a struct was until like 2 years into like when I was using Julia.
You sound a lot like me.
So here's the funny part is that I figured out that the best way to get up to speed on what was happening in Julia was to read up as much as I could. And the best way to do that was to sign up for the GitHub notifications, because I don't know, GitHub seemed to be like the place where programmers were. And so I started getting a lot of notifications from like all the Julia contributors. And I remember that there was this one guy that every day at midnight would just boom, come in with like 6 or 7 code contributions. He'd be running like benchmarks all over the place. He'd be telling people like, oh, this just finished. I made a report about it. And I was like, oh my, like, who's this like Australian hero coder dude, right? So it looked like he had a picture of the Crocodile Dundee. And so it took me like embarrassingly long to figure out that this person's name was the Nanosoldier. And I don't know if you know who the Nanosoldier is, but the Nanosoldier is a bot.
Oh.
And they've trained the bot to accept like commands. And it's like, hey, bot, please run these benchmarks. And they just have like this script for the benchmarks. And they'll say like, oh, the benchmarks are finished. Here's the finished progress report or whatever. And I, for the longest time, was just like, you know, this guy, he always comes in at midnight. You know, he's pulling out all the stats. He's done contributions to the compiler, to the parser, to the everything, to linear algebra. He just knows everything. And it's a very humbling origin story for me. It's like, oh, I thought the Nanosoldier was a real person.
That's really funny.
Yeah.
I've always been a fan of physics. One of the reasons why I went to school was I wanted to study physics originally. I ended up studying mathematics, but I wanted to study physics. You're in a physics PhD program, correct?
No.
Oh, you're not?
No. I'm still an undergraduate.
So this is very interesting to me now, because most of the people that I encounter that know Julia are definitely like graduate students, like almost at their PhD, or like professors. So it's awesome that you're already doing that. Like you're already in the Julia ecosystem and a part of the community, which, by the way that you were talking about it earlier just reminds me of how kind of close the Julia community is and how like supportive the Julia community is, which is pretty awesome.
It might still be a small village. I don't know, like that it's easy to measure. There's still like only one big annual conference for Julia. I mean, there's local meetups, but they're not the same. Like if you want to compare to Python, there's like PyConf and there's SciPy and there's a gajillion Python conferences. Like, so everyone that I think is a core Julia language dev, like still kind of fits in my head as a concept, which is not that many people. There's this, I don't know if you know this concept called a truck factor, but it's at some point someone looked at open source software and they're like, how many people would have to be run over by a truck on a Monday for your open source project to be dead? And for us, it's still like, I don't know, 10 people? Like if 10 core Julia contributors got knocked out, I mean, there's a way that you can sort of quantify this by like lines of codes contributed in something. We should really clone Jeff and Stefan and Keno. Like that's the moral of the story.
It'll get there. It'll get there soon too, I think. Are you getting to use Julia at all in your undergrad program, or?
So it's been interesting. So I took David Sanders' course. There's also Luis Bennett's course. Those were like optional. That was an optional course. And those were great. Those focus mostly on the like using Julia as a calculator. Like it could have been Python. We start out with examples of like, this is why you can use Python. Like here's dual numbers. Here's all the differential equation stuff. Here's like why it's fast and why you won't be installing Conda mid-course. And you can't really talk about like, hey, this is multiple dispatch. Like, hey, let's build like an ecosystem of like third-party dependencies with binary builder and like have our users not worry about installing that. Like there's all these software engineering practices that Julia just like sort of smooths over, that you just nightmares that you will not have. Communicating like you're not going to have this pain anymore is really hard to people who have like barely turned in like a couple dozen programming assignments.
It's great to hear though that, you know, like you said, even though, you know, it's an undergraduate course, you're using Julia basically as like a calculator, but at the same time, they are introducing Julia as like, here's this language that you're going to have to learn. So they're emphasizing it, right?
So there's definitely a current of professors who are like, all right, let's use Julia in our courses for like intro to programming. And they're like, they're getting people hooked.
Right, exactly. May
I also run a commercial? I just got a word for, there's an Institute for Applied Mathematics at UNAM called the Amos. Amos is a graduate studies and research institute that does applied mathematics research. Instituto de Investigaciones en Matemáticas Aplicadas y Sistemas, I think. I never remember the full acronym, but the point is they do a whole bunch of applied math stuff. And I just got an email that I will be giving a 20-hour intensive Julia course there.
Oh, awesome.
I'm really stoked. Yeah. I think it's going to be called something like Julia for People in a Hurry. And I'm just going to pack in so much content. You will have faster code by the end of this. So help me God.
Will that be like recorded, or will that be available to people outside of the university at all? Or
you will have to pay to take the course, but I do plan to release the source materials.
Okay, perfect.
I don't know if I'll be releasing all the recordings, but at least like all the Pluto notebooks and stuff and like all the cheat sheets and like, hey, this is what you should have learned yesterday. I'm thinking that there's going to be like a really really cool structure for like, because they just like, this institute is like applied math. So there's people that do like everything from like, I don't know, chaotic systems to like epidemiology to like biomedicine and like just everywhere. So I can't really assume people's background. Like it'd be way easier just to say like, all right, screw it. This is everywhere we use Julian physics, right? And just like go with that. So I think I want to do like one day will be like a natural sciences and one day will be like a social sciences kind of day and just like pick up different examples. Like, all right, I'll give you 3 branches of science where you can apply Julia today. Like choose your own adventure.
Yeah, that'll be great. When that's available, the code and everything, let us know because we'll be happy to blast it out. Yeah.
Oh yeah, you will hear about it. I will blast it, and it's gonna be in Spanish too.
Oh, awesome.
Speaking of, before we started recording, I think David might have mentioned to me that you were curious about JuliaCon in Spanish.
I'm not curious about it. I'm helping organize it. In fact, let me announce on this very podcast, we just received last week the very first Julia Spanish submission for JuliaCon. So JuliaCon has only been in English so far as I know. It was at the, Dr. Catherine Hyatt suggested that we run JuliaCon in other languages as well. And just like, all right, release the call for proposals. If people submit something, we'll find someone who speaks Russian or German or simplified Chinese, and we'll try and review it and let people give it in their native language. Like, just have it open to more people, right? Because, I mean, there's like all these buildings from all over the world here. And then if you don't let them speak their language, it's not very... It doesn't feel very international. But this is a big step. And Spanish is the first submission to get on there that's not in English. So I'm poking everyone on my Twitter. It's like, hey, mete algo a JuliaCon. And they're like, no, I'm too anxious. And I'm like, I know, but you should still do it.
Yeah. And I get the anxiety. That's, it's totally natural and understandable.
Yeah, the first JuliaCon talk I gave was like, I think it was also REPL stuff. On Dr. Docstrings, I think. And they were like, someone just told me like, hey, you should submit a JuliaCon talk. And I'm like, me? What? I'm not a genius. And then it's like, you don't get how this works. Like we tell everyone like your work is worth it. Just like go up, share it. And it's really cool. And
that's true. It is. I mean, it's always nice to see from like an audience member's perspective. I love seeing like, here's a sophomore, like a second year undergraduate student talking about the research project they did. They got to use some cool Python package or some cool Julia package or whatever. And yeah, they're not experts in the language. They're not even experts maybe in the subject matter that they're talking about. But it's so much fun to see and hear about their experience.
We've had middle schoolers submit to JuliaCon.
That's amazing.
The most interesting one that I remember was a middle schooler who started doing like musical notation exercises. And they used Julia to like graph some of that and like calculate and do some plots about it. And they were like, hi, I'm blah, blah, blah in 8th grade. And I'm using Julia for whatever. And I'm like, this is awesome. So cool.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so first of all, I think there has to be like some recognition from the organizers that they were like, let's open up a track that's just for people who are diving into the language. And those are called experiences. And so they're super low fuss. They're like, all right, tell us who you are, 3 minutes, what problem you solved with Julia, like what was cool about it, the first time you tried it, like that's the goal for people to like start stepping into the community. It's not like, hey, we want to hear about the super new genius thing you did with Julia. It's like, yeah, those people will talk about it. Like, we'll hear about them. Great. That's not the space for them. This is the space to hear about people who are new to the community and the language and we're starting out, and that's exactly the kind of like bridges that you want to build, right?
Yeah.
So there's like, I appreciate the foresight that people had from like other great language conferences, but also B, like the fact that like teenagers can like submit to JuliaCon and get in. It's like, it was a really great talk, like objectively.
Yeah.
So I was also video editor for JuliaCon last year, and there was a certain block of like 30 minutes of JuliaCon talks. And the first 15 were about how they were using Julia for particle physics at the LHC or something, and like just like massive amounts of like, I don't know, petabyte data crunching, something incredible.
Yeah.
And then the next 15 minutes was someone who went like, you know what, I should use Monte Carlo methods to optimize my Pokemon strategies.
Yeah.
And it was just like the breakneck switch, like context switch was amazing.
Yeah, that's really funny.
Oh, and talking about conferences, actually, it I think the canonical Julia Mexican origin story is because David Sanders went to a SciPy conference. So David Sanders, before he was a Julia stan, he was a Python stan, and so almost everyone in Mexico that's really into Julia like has heard that like David Sanders was like the person who really got into it. And so he's like where the lineage starts. That's where all the grad student genealogy originates. And so David Sanders went to a SciPy conference, and then that's where he saw somebody from Julia giving a talk, and he was like, "What? What is this?" And then that was like 2014 something. I don't know. And then he learned about Julia at a SciPy conference because they have like other language tracks, which I think is great.
Right. Yeah.
And that's something that I wanted to talk about because before we were on the podcast, you're like, I hope people don't really get tired of me talking about Python. And I'm like, I get that, like ripping on Python people, like not being able to manage their dependencies. Like there's some good jokes in there, and like some Schadenfreude, and like you deserve better sort of feeling. As in, like no one should spend time on this. Like there is a better way. Like there's a better life out there for you. I swear. But there's all like I think that there's definitely been. I'd like to think an earnest openness to other programming language communities from within Julia. Like when it comes to the flops, we will say like Python, you should not choose Python for these sorts of projects. When it comes to the flops and composability, you should not choose R for this. But that doesn't mean that we don't recognize like the stats ecosystem that our people have is just incredible. Like
right. Yeah.
There's no denying that. And so I have a working all my blog posts are in process because I just like amassed them like a big ball of mud over years. But one of them is like all of the good things that Julia stole from other languages. And there's this like conceit from some people that, you can just reinvent the world with just like a couple new programming language ideas and, just like set up like, I'll just solve all the problems again. But like with this one new cool trick. And it's like, Julia is not the story of like 4 genius dudes that got together and just like magically solved multiple dispatch and like got really good at linear algebra and just sort of took off. It's if you understand their backgrounds, like Viral was like excellent at linear algebra. Stefan also had his mathematics background, and he was a data scientist who struggled with Ruby and Python and all the dependencies in the Rube Goldberg machine when he was working with Etsy. Jeff started with like imaging software in C when he was like a teenager. Like there's all of these like backgrounds that sort of like congealed into the knowledge of like all of these things hurt for very like dissimilar but connected reasons. There is a better way to do this, and the way to sort of build like the core ideas of Julia are like you need a JIT compiler and you want to have like the subtyping algorithm, right? And those aren't new ideas. They came from other places from before. And there's just a lot of even if that was only on the technical end, and this is where we can segue into the REPL. It's almost like he's planned this. There's a lot of understated not only productivity, but there's so much of the technology that can go into the tooling, and part of that is how you interface with the language. So managing your dependencies is a big pain. It doesn't matter if the best code you could ever come up for I don't know, analyzing MRIs is in some abandoned repo in C++ that only compiles in like some esoteric CMake file or whatever. It's like, all right, great, that exists. Nobody has the time to like import your dependencies and figure it out. We need like fast enough code and then like the ability to switch, like flip, like tweak all the knobs to figure out which one applies the best. And so that story of like, if you're like within a factor of, I don't know, 2 of C, but you can switch from like 20 different strategies and figure out which one's algorithmically the best. Like, who cares if you're not like optimally C? Like, you have better things to do with your time than like start running all the kernels in assembly. And there's a lot of like, it's very easy to start saying like, oh, I have a benchmark and I did so many operations per second and I served so many requests. And like, go off. But it's not really, that's not how humans work. The humans work like, all right, we have X amount of months. We don't have the budget for this. Which tool lets us do this without worrying too much about that, right? Like there's constraints, and a very real constraint is how much like prioritizing human time. You know, oh no, we don't have the 3 months for from the HPC cluster, and it's like you won't even get your grad students to compile like your busted code from someone that abandoned the project like 5 years ago. Like it's not a thing that happens. Like there's just like a fundamental misunderstanding of where like technical debt can come from, and it's not. I'm not even like standing Julia. Like just any language that at least has like a coherent way to like manage your package dependencies, a coherent way of dealing with, you know, performance and trying to improve it, finding out how you can get help, not worrying about cross-platform issues. Like these are highly non-trivial things. Like just the amount of stuff you need to like get the terminal working on Windows. It's really, really hard.
Yeah.
People, and I think, and that's why I really, really, really love Julia's REPL, because it's a completely cross-platform experience. Well, not completely. I might talk about some of the Windows glitches, but that's because Windows just let's just not talk about Windows. But there's a lot of stuff that you can do for all the stuff that the Julia REPL allows you. And I really, really tried like finding other places where I feel as productive, where my code feels as fast. I mean, that's a user error right there. Where I can find the help docs. Like I've made an effort to learn other languages as well as Julia. I know they exist. I just miss all the features, right? And in fact, let me. So for those of you who haven't heard, at JuliaCon there's workshops. So some really cool guy will be like, I'll teach you about GPU programming and how to measure all your kernels and blah, blah, blah. And like, we'll get your code to work on GPUs in this workshop, or at least I'll talk you through like some really cool examples so you can get on your way and you'll get your hands on the code. And so they're 3 hours and you're expected to like provide materials for all the audience members to ask questions live and, you know, work through examples. I'm submitting a proposal for JuliaCon, so fingers crossed that I get it, so that we get a Julia REPL mastery workshop. And this is part of the outline because, you know, if you're going to be coding in Julia, you're going to be spending a lot of time in the REPL. And if you're not, you should consider you should consider like upping up your skills. In the same way that just getting to know your editor can just like really pay off dividends. Like, oh, like knowing what a Vim macro does, really useful. Knowing Vim movement, really useful. I don't care if it's Vim or Emacs. Like, I just care that you have a tool that lets you manipulate the text in front of you, like at the speed of your hands and like as fast as you can think about it. Not so much which labels on it. I think I can advertise a little bit of science. And I'm like, all right, if you can tell there's a lot of unfinished stuff to be here. So on my screen, I'm showing a big Google spreadsheet and it says REPL modes. Oh my God, that's a lot. And I just try to come up with, so on Twitter, I have my handle as like the Julia REPL Stan account. And I chose that deliberately because I was like, you know what, like there's a lot of really smart Julia people. And I don't really want to say that I'm the smartest one or my code is the fastest, but the easiest way to figure this out is that I am the REPL Stan. Doesn't need any qualifications. It's like, I don't need to prove it to anyone. It just needs to be like, all right, I just really like it. And I get to talk about it when people ask me about it. So I'm like, yeah, why not? I mean, I do enjoy it. And I think people are missing out when they don't use all the features to its full extent. And these are some of the features that I try to think about. You know, you have inline doc strings, you have a color prompt. You know, like these are the things. Like whenever I don't have like any of these, I just get like instantly aggravated. Like, oh, yeah. Python, there's no color here. Like you can do better. I mean, there's color in IPython, so that's why I'm including it on the chart as well, right? So like I want to try and give people the benefit of the doubt and like be honest about this. Have hot code reloading. Not all languages have hot code reloading. I mean, I have Haskell here, which may or may not have it. I think there's a version of it that does, but like sometimes like, no, you have to reload the file. And all right, maybe I'll give them a score. I'll figure out maybe like a color code it, make it easier. You know, having access to your REPL history, having history smart search, like markdown rendering, image rendering, latex rendering, instantiating environments. running a test suite. Like these are just like things that when you don't have them, I'm like instantly just like, oh God, why am I not using Julia for this? And it hurts.
Quick access to the shell. That's one that I love.
Which one?
I don't know if you have it on your, I didn't see the whole list here, but like just having quick access to your shell, right?
Shell access. Yeah. In fact, let me pull up there we go. So I don't know, we can pull up doc strings. So I'm going to go into, for people that haven't really done a deep dive into the REPL, I'm just going to talk about a few of my favorite features and some that you might not know, right? So I just pressed a question mark and that goes into help mode, and you can see that because it changes color. That's really helpful.
Yep.
And here's something that some people don't know. You can also include strings here. In fact, you can include entire regular expressions. So I can do something like...
really? Okay.
I don't know. What would be interesting? How about positive? Right? And so it will go into all those functions and figure out, like, hey, I found the string positive here.
That's awesome.
Okay, cool.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so
and then you can use
just
a regular
include
expression
string,
as well. Awesome. Okay.
I think it does. I'm almost sure it does. I have it written down. So I can do either, let's say, what's something that's not as regular? Let's say that it ends with, or it starts with conjugate, maybe?
Sure. Something.
All right, but it does take a regular expression. That's the thing. There we go. That's the one. Yeah. And so if we go into linear algebra, and this, I mean, tab completions here are just amazing. Algebra. I mean, if I can get it to work. There we go. Yeah, well, I should first import linear algebra, I guess. There we go. This is another one that I just learned. So I could like start retyping the previous command, but if you just do Control P, then it like skips back in the history. And it's almost the same as like searching for the up arrow, but I don't know why I keep finding it so useful.
It looks like you're also using Oh My REPL as well.
So Oh My REPL is like the batteries included experience, because if you're not using Oh My REPL, you miss out on a lot of like the syntax highlighting in colors. So by syntax highlighting, I mean that like different things in different syntactic elements will be colored differently. So the prompt will be this color. The equal sign, when it's assigning, will be this color. Variables will be like black. Function names will be like blue. Like that's what I mean by syntax highlighting, right? If you've never faced that before, it's a really good way to like just like organize the code. And so whenever I don't have syntax highlighting, I also get instantly aggravated. There's this really weird thing I've heard from like computer science people sometimes, that they're like, no, you don't need colors. Like whenever you're like logging into a shell, you only need Vim and like the raw power of your like masculine thought process. Like you don't need colors. And I'm like, why would you ever like reject tooling to help you? This is just dumb.
Yeah. I mean, I've met people like that, and it seems, all I'll say is that I like to make things easy for myself. And
yeah,
colors make it very easy for me to just parse what I'm looking at. So
yeah.
So here's something really cool that if you haven't figured out, it's really interesting. So let's say that I remember that I had defined this function called, or this variable called, I don't know, 0 or ZS. If I just type ZS and then I do the up arrow, it will search in my history for the most recent thing that matches what I wrote. So this is I don't know what this was. I used it for like some graphic stuff and I needed to lift. But the point is, like, you can have very, very powerful so that was a feature that I was missing. You can have very powerful like historical autocomplete. So let's say that I want to see the last parse that I called. That would be Control P. There we go. And I can just like keep pressing Control P and go back, go all the way back in my history. If you want it to be even more powerful, this is something that Oh My REPL includes. So shout out to Christopher Carlson who included this. You can just type Control R. And Control R sends you into a fuzzy find mode. So I don't know if you've used fuzzy find, but I don't really know how it works, but it's like if you had like a search engine and it did like fuzzy string matching. So I don't know. I want to look at like the last time that I used a GC. And it's like, oh, so it comes up with like all the most recent hits. And it's like, oh yeah, let's time the GC for this new Julia session. Oh look.
Yeah, no, like the fuzzy find is really nice because if you're not exactly sure how something was spelled or something like that, but you know, like it's kind of like this. Maybe you've got a couple letters off in it. Like the fuzzy find will still find that kind of stuff for you, right? So it's not so strict as like it has to be spelled exactly right, or have all the right characters in the right order. As long as you're close, it'll probably help you find it. So that's super useful.
Now that we're talking about fuzzy string matching, let me bring up this really cool package that someone brought up called the fix.jl. It's by Michael Slavinsky. So
the fix.
If I did,
okay.
I think so. This is another super cool thing. If I just do / you get the REPL auto completion. This wouldn't be a proper Julia talk without somebody talking about Unicode REPL auto completion. Right?
Yeah.
And so obviously I misspelled sign instead of like half pi or whatever. But here's something cool. I think there we go.
Oh, that is awesome. Yeah. Okay.
So what just happened?
David, I think you caught on to this.
Yes.
You want to try?
What this reminds me of is there is a package called the F word. Only not it's not that, it's the actual F word, right? But and this is something that you can use for like I think I've seen ones for like Git and for like just your shell, your terminal, like all that kind of stuff. And yeah, like if you make a little mistake in your typing, and like this, like you type sit instead of sign, and then instead of having to like go back up through your history and then like go fix it, you just type like the F word and hit enter, and it'll just like fix it for you as much as it can. So this is, I think, kind of a reference to that, right?
Yeah. So what's really cool, so obviously within my not obviously, but if you've never used this before, within your Julia folder, so this is something else that I love. We can do like vim, and then it will you can autocomplete stuff within the shell. This is just amazing, right? And so from here you can do which one is it? Startup? No. Config, there we go. And then there's a file called startup. And so here you can place like all of your initial packages, and it'll eat up some of your startup time, but you know, I always want to have benchmark tools and all my REPLs set up. So if there's just like a little setup script where you can define like the string for what you want to input if you want to have like the fix come in and be like, oh, let me guess what you were trying to do. And so I have it set up so that every time that I screw up, I just type F.
Yeah.
And then it will try to help me out. Here's something that I don't think that you've seen before. If you access this super internals looking field name, you can change the prompt name to whatever you want.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you can just set it up so that equals, you know, talk Julia. There we go.
Nice. That's awesome.
And so you go, sup? And I mean, that's a really silly thing. This one's mostly for show off, because if you mess with this what's it called, like prompt, then you're gonna not let other people copy paste your Julia REPL code.
Yeah.
Right. So that's
sure,
also something that I really, really, really like about Julia. It's very easy to just take somebody else's code and just like paste it into your REPL. And that's something that like you really miss, like Python really missed the boat on that one. Like having like the significant white space thing, like that really like that adds like extra 30 seconds to copy pasting people's code because of formatting from Stack Overflow or whatever.
In fact, I was not aware of this feature of Julia until relatively recently, when Randy was showing me something and he copied a bunch of code that had like all the REPL prompts in it, and he went to like copy and paste, and I was like, oh, Randy, like you got all your prompts in there, like it's not gonna, and then he just pasted it, and I was like, Like,
And so
whoa.
and I don't know what that takes. It takes like, I don't know, maybe a couple hours for one of the core devs to like put it into the language, but it's such a multiplier for productivity.
Yeah.
And there's this thing that I call the Julia smile factor. Like whenever you really want to try, like you want to like venture out into the waters of like, wait, like I remember there's a parse function, but is there like a try parse function? And then you just go tab, tab, and then like it exists, and then you're like,
Yeah.
oh wait, does this even like, let me see what I need to supply the arguments for. And so you also go tab here, and then you're like, oh, those are all the things.
Yeah.
And so there's all of these things that are just like really well gelled together. And whenever you want to like go out and try it and it actually works, you're just like, somebody nailed this. And so that's what I call the smile factor. Like whenever you like try something that you don't know if it works, but it really, really should, and it does.
It does. I've experienced
it's a
this
real
a lot.
chef's kiss. So I call those the Julia smile factor moments, and I've tweeted about it. Yeah.
You know, kind of going back to something you mentioned earlier, that I think it is important though to recognize that really all this kind of stuff, it's fantastic they did this, and it makes us smile and it makes us so happy to use Julia. But in some way you gotta hand it to some of the things that previous languages got either, I don't want to say got wrong, but it just didn't, maybe they just didn't think about it because it was too early in the game. Like there wasn't enough like built up experience with working with programming languages for people to like realize that these were huge pain points yet, right? So
that's one of the things that I really respect of the Julia community and like Julia devs as a whole. Like they are really big. Like as a community, we try to be really big about knowing about prior art and what didn't work. It's not just like we really need the receipts for all your paper, or all your ideas, or like it's not like who are you and what is your name, and if you're not you don't have like fancy credentials, then like we don't want to hear about it. It's more like, why did this idea work, or like where has this been proposed before, and like should we adopt it? It's not a case of like, all right, Python or R does this. It's sometimes like, all right, they've done that, does it work? And then someone's like, you know what, it kind of sucks. Why does it suck? And they're like, this, and it's like, all right, we can do better, right?
Right.
We should learn
and learn from all that experience. I was actually having a conversation with someone on Twitter not too long ago, where they were telling me how they still thought of like Python as like a new language. And it's like, Python's 30 years old. Like Python was created in 1990, or like it wasn't even version 1.0. I think it was like 0.9 that they put out in like 91 or 92 or something like that. And you think about what was the world like in 1991, 1992, how many people had access to the internet? All these things that you kind of like, it's very easy. And I'm not saying you're doing this. I'm saying just you see people like on Twitter and on the internet, like will just trash sometimes like the Python decisions Python developers made, and it's like, you do realize though that like some of these things go back to like the early 90s, and there's so much technical debt there that they have to be very careful about how they make changes now, because it affects so many things downstream. And so really what the beautiful thing about like the Julia and everything is that they've been able to take that, and rather than just saying like, oh look, like we do it, it's really, I feel like it's been a much more collaborative kind of aspect where it's like, hey, we want to learn from the experiences that you have had with your language, and try to do something better. And I think having the dialogue between language creators and language maintainers and everything just helps everyone. Like it helps new languages be better.
So it's not only you that have been getting this feeling. I think it's been like established like Julia core dev philosophy of like, take good ideas wherever they come from and continually build the bridges from people who have done the work wherever they may come from. And it's, so if you go back to, so I consider myself, besides the Julia REPL Stan account, I consider myself an amateur YouTube Julia historian, because I've seen like almost every old talk that like Stefan or Jeff have given about Julia from like way back in the day. And there's stuff there from like SciPy conferences in like 2014.
I
There's like
remember those. I remember
Mhm.
those for sure.
I've seen some of those.
there's some from like Kurion, Prague, 2016. Like there's some that they've given at Elixir conferences, and they talk about the concurrency model that they have.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's not the best. And so Stefan says, like, it's not a best fit for us, but like, we really, really wanted actors, but we couldn't get it in. And so one thing has been like the continuous campaign to like talk about Julia at like wherever Julia forums and like talk to people that have like faced real problems and learn from their experiences. But there's also been, at least within JuliaCon, almost every JuliaCon has tried to like extend one of the keynotes to people that are from other programming language communities. So Heather Miller, she's a really big Scala contributor. Guy Steele built generics in Java and tried to build Fortress, failed along the way, learned a lot of valuable lessons, gave some of them in that talk. Steve Johnson, he's a monster because he made the Fast Fourier FFTW, Fast Fourier Transform device. We were really lucky that we got him on as a like Julia language contributor. Also, unfortunately, I tried to get someone to keynote for JuliaCon from the Rust programming language community. That won't be happening because of reasons, but I was really excited. I'm hoping that we're going to get a Rustation person to join us at a future JuliaCon keynote. But we'll get someone, we just had them confirm, we're going to get someone from another programming language community. And it's going to be really cool. Yeah, I'm excited for it. So going back to your point, it's not only like, oh, I feel like Julia people really take it in stride. It's like there's a lot of people from different backgrounds that all had like technical computing as like, I want the flops and I want the interactivity and I don't want to compromise on either. Right? And so there's just like a lot of worlds where the two language problem just like rears its ugly head again.
So yeah, Miguel, thank you so much for joining us and just showing us
Thank
so
you for
many
having
amazing
me.
new things. There are two questions though that we have to ask you before we leave here. And that is one, if you do use a code editor, which editor you do use to work with Julia? And I said, you said you were a polyglot, but what's your favorite if you had to pick one?
I just use the REPL, like straight up.
Just the REPL?
Yeah, like I step in, like, does it count if it like sometimes steps in with Vim and then I keep going with the
Sure.
REPL?
Yeah, it works.
Yeah.
You can answer. I mean, you could say, I write on my cat's back, and that'd be a valid answer. So.
Yeah, I'll say it. Like, I think the REPL is the best IDE. It's just the easiest thing to get started with. It doesn't have everything, but it's got a lot of punch, packs a lot of punch.
And what's your favorite Julia package?
Oh,
I know that's a hard one.
Binary Builder, because of what it allows. So for those of you who don't know, you're not gonna reinvent, like you're not gonna rewrite all the software in the world in Julia. You're gonna have to depend on other people's C code at some point or something.
Sure.
And so what Binary Builder is, it sets up a small virtual machine on your computer so that you go into this sandbox environment. You try to like build a make file for whatever dependency you're running on. Like, let's say you're trying to get the world's fastest prime counting algorithm. And somebody has already done that in C and published a paper about it because, nerds. And so you, like, if you download the code to your laptop and then you compile it with make, like, you can definitely call that from Julia. But if you want other people to also have access to that, it's really, really hard to just tell, or not hard, but it's burdensome to tell people like, oh yeah, you should download this and then use make, and then someone's like, I'm on Windows, and you're like, ah. And so somebody figured it out that you can basically like build a sandbox, a Linux sandbox, and then just basically lie to it for all the environment variables and have it build for all the backends that you want if you download them to this sandbox.
Yeah.
The end result is that Binary Builder provides you with a small wizard within the REPL, right, to spice it up a bit. And so you can work through via REPL wizard of like, all right, you're now in a sandbox environment. Try to like do the make file thing and like get the proper artifacts set up where they should be. And so the end result is that if one developer sets up the wizard and goes through the process, they can get the code to be shippable for every other OS architecture and, you know, machine usable by a Julia dev.
Yeah.
So I did this for prime count a long while ago because someone had figured out that the best, most efficient algorithm for counting primes was in some C repo somewhere. And I looked at it and it's like, oh, they're just exporting one function. So it was a really easy make build. Fortunately, it can be heroic and almost impossible if people don't even have it set up properly. But like in the dream scenario where it works, people only ever have to do using prime count _ JLL, and then they can just write a one-liner function and they have that code available to them. They have the fastest prime counting algorithm published or whatever from within Julia in 3 lines.
Yeah.
No matter what OS or laptop they're using.
Right.
And so that might be like, you might think it's like at first it sounded like a contrived example, and then you figured out that you can pay people to work on this full time, like Mose Giordano and Elliot Sala, right? And so they're some of the core devs behind it, and they've basically set it up so that all other big Julia packages that depend on these third code party dependencies can just install them via the package manager, just saying like using the JLL. Like that's it. That's all you need.
Yeah.
And so that is so much like freed labor from a lot of people.
Right.
And it's amazing.
Super cool.
I think it's one of the most underrated packages in terms of like how much it leverages dev potential across the entire ecosystem, like just period. Like the ability to have third code dependencies be like auto installed behind the screens and you don't even worry about it. It's almost mind boggling, really. It's insane.
I agree.
So yeah, I think it's not the most flashy one. They have a really nice wizard. Like they have a literal wizard, like within like the prompt. Like you ask for the wizard, the REPL wizard, and there's like a little dude with a wand and everything. It's pretty cool in ASCII art, obviously.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah, I think it's that one. But definitely, if it wasn't for that one, I'd probably just say, "Oh, my REPL," because I hate not having colors on my REPL.
All right. Well, thanks again, Miguel, for coming on. And this was a lot of fun. And I think Randy and I both learned a lot from this. So
yeah, and I've just been playing in my REPL the whole time, really.
Don't you love having like the clear screen thing? Like if I don't have it, I just get aggravated. I get so aggravated.
Control L.
All right. Yeah. Well, I guess thank you, Miguel, and yeah, that'll be it.
All right.
Yep.
Take care.
We'll see everyone next week.